The doctor's words hung in the air, heavy and cold, like a death sentence. Dilated cardiomyopathy, severe, we need to operate soon. I stared at him, Dr. Adams, his face a blur of professional concern, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. Heart condition? Surgery? Me? But I'm only 25, I whispered, my voice trembling. I, I'm healthy, I exercise, I eat well. Dr. Adams sighed, his gaze softening slightly. Unfortunately, Elena, these things don't always discriminate. Your condition is advanced. Without surgery, your heart will continue to weaken, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. I was terrified of the surgery, of the risks, of the uncertainty. But beneath the fear, there was a flicker of hope, a belief that I could get through this. I had to. What? What are my chances? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. With the surgery, your prognosis is good, Dr. Adams replied. It's a complex procedure, but our team is experienced. We'll do everything we can. He started explaining the details, the risks, the recovery process, but his words were a blur. My mind was racing, jumping ahead to the practicalities. The cost, the time off work, my family. My family, I said, interrupting him. I need to call my parents. My parents. The thought of them brought a wave of comfort, a sense of security. They would know what to do. They would take care of everything. They always did. Or at least I thought they did. I called them from the hospital room, my hands shaking as I dialed the familiar number. My mom answered, her voice bright and cheerful. Elena, honey, how are you? Mom, I said, my voice cracking. I have some bad news. I explained the diagnosis, the surgery, the urgency of the situation. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched on for an agonizingly long time. Oh, honey, my mom finally said, her voice laced with a strange mixture of concern and something else, something I couldn't quite place. That's terrible, but don't worry, we'll take care of everything. We'll figure it out. The surgery. It's expensive, I said, my voice hesitant. But Grandma and Grandpa's medical fund, that should cover it, right? My grandparents had left me a substantial sum of money, specifically earmarked for medical expenses. It was a safety net, a reassurance that I would always be taken care of, no matter what. Of course, honey, my mom said, her voice a little too quick, a little too reassuring. We'll take care of it. Don't you worry about a thing. I hung up, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. My parents would handle it. They always did. I just needed to focus on getting better, on preparing for the surgery. But as I looked around the sterile hospital room, a nagging doubt began to creep into my mind. Something about my mom's voice, her tone, her evasiveness. It didn't sit right. I pushed the thought aside. I was being paranoid. My parents loved me. They would never. I was wrong, so horribly, terribly wrong. Later that day, I saw her. Camille, my younger sister, the golden child, the beautiful one. The one who could do no wrong. She swept into my hospital room, a whirlwind of designer clothes, perfectly styled hair, and an air of effortless superiority. Elena, she said, her voice a mixture of pity and condescension. I heard about your condition. So sorry. She didn't look sorry. She looked radiant, glowing, as if she'd just stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. And, in a way, she probably had. Camille had always been the center of attention, the focus of our parents' adoration. She was the one with the looks, the charm, the effortless grace that I could never seem to master. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who always faded into the background. Thanks, Camille, I said, my voice flat. Mom and Dad are devastated, she continued, her eyes avoiding mine. They're doing everything they can. I know, I replied, clinging to that belief, to that hope. She perched on the edge of my bed, her perfectly manicured hand resting on my arm. You know, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, this whole thing, it's kind of a blessing in disguise. A blessing? I repeated, my eyebrows raising in disbelief. Well, yeah, she said, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. Mom and Dad were talking, and they realized this is my chance, my opportunity to finally break into the big leagues. She gestured to herself, to her flawless complexion, her perfect teeth, her sculpted nose. This surgery, it was expensive, but it was worth it. I'm going to be a star, Elena, and it's all thanks to, well, my mind struggled to process what she was saying. The surgery, her opportunity. My money? What what are you talking about, Camille? I asked, my voice trembling. She just smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Don't worry about it, Elena, she said. You just focus on getting better, or not. And with that, she stood up, smoothed down her designer dress, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my shattered illusions and the growing, terrifying realization that my own family had betrayed me. The surgery was the following week. I prepared myself mentally as best I could. I wrote letters, just small notes, expressing my love for them, for my parents, for Camille. Ironic, isn't it? The day of the surgery arrived, a blur of anxiety and a desperate, clinging hope. I was prepped, gowned, wheeled into the pre-op room. The nurses were kind, efficient, their words reassuring. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the lingering doubt that had been gnawing at me since my conversation with my mother. Everything's going to be okay, Elena, the nurse said, adjusting my IV drip. You're in good hands. I forced a smile, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I know, I said. Thank you. And then the administrator walked in. Her face was grim, her expression apologetic. Ms. Hartley, she said, her voice hesitant. I'm afraid there's been a problem with the payment. My heart stopped. A cold wave of dread washed over me. What? What problem? The funds, they weren't transferred, she explained, her voice softening with sympathy. We've been trying to reach your parents, but we haven't been able to get through. Not transferred? I repeated, my voice a strangled whisper. But they promised. They said, I'm so sorry, Ms. Hartley, the administrator said, but we can't proceed with the surgery without payment. Hospital policy. The words hit me like a physical blow. The surgery, postponed, canceled, because of money? There must be a mistake, I insisted, my voice rising in panic. My grandparents, they left me a medical fund. It's more than enough to cover the costs. The administrator shook her head. I'm afraid there's no record of any such fund, Ms. Hartley. And your parents? They haven't made any arrangements for payment. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My parents. They hadn't paid. They'd lied. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called my mom, my dad, Camille. No answer. Straight to voicemail, every single one of them. Please, I begged the administrator. There has to be something you can do. This surgery, it's life or death. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pity. I'm so sorry, Miss Hartley, she said, but my hands are tied. I was alone, abandoned, betrayed. My own family had left me to die. The next few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, desperate pleas, and crushing rejections. I called every relative, every friend, every acquaintance I could think of, but no one could help. No one had the money or the willingness to cover the cost of the surgery. And then the darkness started to creep in. The chest pain, the shortness of breath, the dizzying waves of nausea. My heart, my weak, failing heart, was giving out. I collapsed, the world spinning around me, the sounds of the hospital fading into a distant hum. I was dying, and no one cared. I remember the feeling of falling, of sinking, of letting go, the pain, the fear, the terror. It all faded away, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I was floating weightless in a sea of darkness. Then voices, distant, muffled, distorted. Heart failure, no chance. So young. I tried to speak, to scream, to fight back, but I couldn't. I was trapped, paralyzed, a prisoner in my own body. I overheard the doctors, their hushed tones, their grim pronouncements. They were talking about me, about my chances, about my lack of chances. She's not going to make it, one of them said. Her heart is too weak. We've done all we can. Such a shame, another voice replied, and her family nowhere to be found. Their words were like daggers, piercing through the fog of my fading consciousness. My family. They'd abandoned me. They'd left me to die. And Camille, my sister, she was probably celebrating, basking in the glow of her new, surgically enhanced beauty, paid for with my life. A wave of rage, of hatred surged through me, a final, desperate burst of adrenaline. I wanted to live. I wanted to fight. I wanted to make them pay. But it was too late. My body was shutting down, my heart giving out, my life slipping away. And then I saw her, a woman, standing at the edge of my vision, her face blurred, indistinct, but her presence calming. Helena, she said, her voice soft, gentle, but firm. It's not your time. You have a purpose. You have a fight ahead of you. It was Dr. Ramirez, the only one who seemed to care, the only one who saw me as a person, not just a lost cause. I can't, I whispered, my voice a ragged breath. I'm too weak. No, she said, her voice stronger now. You are stronger than you think. You have a fire in you, Elena. Don't let it die. She explained quickly, urgently, that she'd found a charity program, a last-minute opening, a chance to get me the surgery I needed. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was my only hope. I can get the board to sign the papers, they trust me. But I need your consent, she continued. I nodded weakly. I wanted to thank her, but only a sob came out. I felt Dr. Ramirez take my hand as the world turned black again. But this time, there was hope. Waking up was like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, a constant reminder of my fragile mortality. But I was alive. Against all odds, against my own family's wishes, I had survived. Dr. Ramirez was there, her face etched with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. You made it, Elena, she said, her voice soft. You're a fighter. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. She had saved my life, not just physically, but also spiritually. She'd given me a second chance, a chance to what? To get revenge. The thought was a sudden, sharp spark in the darkness of my despair. It ignited a fire within me, a cold, burning rage that consumed my grief, my fear, my self-pity. My family. They had left me to die. They had chosen Camille's vanity, her superficial dreams over my life. They had betrayed me, abandoned me, condemned me, and they would pay. Thank you, Dr. Ramirez, I said, my voice hoarse but firm, for everything. You don't need to thank me, Elena, she replied, her eyes filled with compassion. Just live. Live your life to the fullest. Don't let them take that away from you. Her words resonated with me, a powerful reminder of the preciousness of life, of the second chance I'd been given. But living my life to the fullest now had a new meaning. It meant reclaiming my power, rebuilding my future, and making my family regret the day they ever crossed me. The first step was to disappear, to become a ghost, a phantom, invisible to the people who had wronged me. I changed my phone number, cutting off all contact with my family and my old friends. I blocked them on social media, erasing any trace of my online presence. I even went to a lawyer, a stern, no-nonsense woman recommended by Dr. Ramirez, and legally changed my name and removed my parents as my beneficiaries and emergency contacts. The cord was severed. Are you sure about this, Ms.? The lawyer started, looking at my documents. Yes, I responded. It's important. Leaving the hospital was like stepping into a different world. I was weak, physically, but my mind was sharp, focused, driven by a singular purpose. I rented a small, cheap apartment in a neighborhood far from my old life, a place where no one knew me, where I could start over. I had nothing. No money, no possessions, no connections. Just the clothes on my back, the scars on my chest, and the burning fire of revenge in my heart. But I had something else, too. Something my family had always underestimated, always dismissed. I had my intelligence, my resilience, my determination, and I had a plan. I spent my first few days in my new apartment resting, recovering, and plotting. I replayed the events leading up to my death, analyzing every detail, every conversation, every betrayal. I dissected my family's dynamics, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I vowed to make them pay, not with violence, not with direct confrontation, That was too easy, too quick. No, I would make them suffer, slowly, methodically, completely. I would dismantle their lives piece by piece, just as they had tried to dismantle mine. I would expose their lies, their hypocrisy, their cruelty. I would strip them of everything they held dear, their wealth, their status, their reputation. I would become their worst nightmare, and they wouldn't even see me coming. My transformation began with a name. Elena Hartley, the weak, obedient daughter, the forgotten sister, was dead. I needed a new identity, a new persona, a shield to protect me, a weapon to wield. I chose the name Victoria Thorne. Victoria for victory, Thorne for the pain I intended to inflict. It was a strong name, a confident name, a name that demanded respect. Then came the appearance. I cut my hair, dyed it a different color, changed my style of dress. I traded my comfortable, practical clothes for sharp, sophisticated outfits. I learned to walk, to talk, to carry myself with a newfound confidence, a quiet authority that commanded attention. But the most important transformation was internal. I buried my emotions, my vulnerability, my fear deep within myself. I built walls around my heart, impenetrable barriers of steel and ice. I became cold, calculating, ruthless. I became a survivor. I knew I needed to understand the worlds my family inhabited, the cutthroat world of business and finance, the superficial, image-obsessed world of modeling. I devoured books, articles, online courses. I learned about investments, market trends, corporate strategies. I studied the language of power, the art of manipulation, the secrets of success. I also needed money. I couldn't build an empire on nothing. So I started small. I took on odd jobs, freelance gigs, anything that would allow me to earn a living while honing my skills and expanding my knowledge. I discovered I had a knack for online trading, for identifying undervalued assets, for predicting market fluctuations. It was a risky game, but I was good at it. I was patient, disciplined, and I had nothing to lose. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to accumulate wealth. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough. Enough to lay the foundation for my future plans. I also started to build a network of contacts, carefully selecting individuals who could be useful to me. I sought out mentors, advisors, allies who could provide me with information, guidance, and support. And I was cautious, selective, always aware that trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. I learned to read people, to assess their motives, to identify their weaknesses. I became a student of human nature, a master of disguise, a chameleon who could blend into any environment, adapt to any situation. I was reinventing myself, piece by piece, transforming myself from a victim into a predator. I was becoming the woman my family would never recognize, the woman they would never suspect, the woman who would ultimately destroy them. It was a long road, I knew it. But it was my goal. With my new identity and a growing arsenal of knowledge and resources, I began to weave my web, a complex, intricate network of manipulation and sabotage, designed to ensnare my family and bring them to their knees. I started with Camille. Her modeling career was her life, her identity, her source of validation. It was also her most vulnerable point. I used my knowledge of the industry, the contacts I'd cultivated, the rumors I'd carefully planted, to undermine her opportunities, to tarnish her reputation, to slowly but surely destroy her career. I accidentally leaked unflattering photos of her to the tabloids, photos I'd secretly taken during my previous life, photos that showed her in a less than perfect light. I spread whispers about her unprofessional behavior, her diva demands, her alleged substance abuse. I made sure these whispers reached the right ears, the ears of agents, designers, photographers, the people who held the keys to her success. I even used my newfound financial skills to manipulate the stock price of a company that had recently signed Camille as their spokesperson, causing them to lose a significant amount of money and, consequently, drop her as their model. It was subtle, indirect, but devastatingly effective. Camille's career began to crumble. Bookings dried up, contracts were canceled, and her once bright future dimmed. Then, I turned my attention to my parents. Their business, a chain of upscale home goods stores, was their pride and joy, their source of wealth and status. It was also built on a foundation of shaky finances and questionable practices, something I'd always known but had chosen to ignore. I started by subtly manipulating the market, driving down the price of their key suppliers, increasing their costs, and squeezing their profit margins. I used my network of contacts to spread rumors about their financial instability, creating a sense of unease among their investors and creditors. I even leaked damaging information to a local newspaper, exposing their unethical business practices, their exploitation of workers, their tax evasion schemes. The article was a bombshell, triggering an investigation by the authorities and causing a public relations nightmare. But my most audacious move, the one that would ultimately bring them to their knees, was to buy the mortgage on their family home. I did it anonymously, of course, through a shell corporation, a front company that couldn't be traced back to me. I became their landlord, their creditor, the unseen force controlling their destiny. And they had no idea. I watched them from afar as their lives began to unravel. Camille, once the golden child, was now a struggling, washed-up model, her dreams shattered, her future uncertain. My parents, once so confident, so secure in their wealth and status, were now facing financial ruin, social ostracism, and the potential loss of everything they'd ever worked for. I felt a cold satisfaction, a sense of justice served, but it was mixed with a lingering unease. I was becoming a master manipulator, a puppeteer pulling the strings of their destruction. I was playing a dangerous game, and I was starting to wonder if I was losing myself in the process. But I was too far to quit now. It was time. Time for the carefully constructed facade of my family's life to crumble. Time for them to feel the same gut-wrenching despair, the same utter helplessness that they had inflicted upon me. First, Camille, my beautiful, vapid, golden child sister. Her modeling career, built on stolen dreams and my stolen future, was the easiest target. I started by leveraging the contacts I'd made in my new life. A few anonymous tips to the right people, a whisper here, a leaked photo there. Did you hear about Camille Hartley? Apparently, she's difficult, demanding, unreliable. I heard she got that campaign because her parents paid for it. Something about a medical fund? The whispers grew louder, the rumors more persistent. Bookings dried up. Agents stopped returning her calls. Her carefully cultivated image, the one my parents had sacrificed my life for, was shattering. I watched from a distance as she spiraled. The panicked calls to her agent, the desperate attempts to salvage her reputation, the increasingly frantic posts on social media. It was a slow, agonizing decline, and I savored every moment. Next, my parents. Their precious business, their social standing, their carefully constructed illusion of respectability. It was all about to come crashing down. I'd been subtly undermining their financial stability for years, of course, manipulating stock prices, influencing investors, leaking damaging information to their competitors. But now, it was time for the final blow. I called in the loan, the one I held on their family home, the one I'd acquired through a shell corporation, a ghost in their financial records. The notice arrived, a formal legal document demanding immediate repayment of the full amount, an amount they couldn't possibly afford. Their pleas were predictable: calls, emails, desperate attempts to negotiate, to reason, to beg. They contacted their lawyers, their accountants, their financial advisors, but it was useless. I'd made sure of it. "We're ruined, Robert," I heard my mother's panicked thought during one of their frantic phone calls, a call I accidentally intercepted thanks to a little technological manipulation. "Everything, it's all gone." "There has to be something we can do," my father's thought voice replied, but even his usual bluster was tinged with despair. "Who would do this to us? Who could be so cruel?" My mother again. They had no idea. They suspected rivals, competitors, disgruntled former employees. They never suspected me, the daughter they'd left to die. The eviction notice arrived, a stark, final judgment. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. The house they'd lived in for decades, the symbol of their success, their status, their family. It was no longer theirs. I drove by one evening just to see the for sale sign on the lawn, the drawn curtains, the air of desolation. It was a picture of utter ruin, and I felt nothing. A cold, empty satisfaction. A sense of justice, perhaps, but no joy, no triumph. Just emptiness. They were broken. financially, emotionally, and sporadically. The emails started arriving soon after. Not to Elena Hartley, of course. That name was dead, buried. They arrived at my new email address, the one associated with my new identity, the one linked to the holding company that now owned their house. They were desperate, pleading, filled with a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled accusations. To whom it may concern, we are writing to you regarding the recent foreclosure on our property. We believe there has been a mistake. We are willing to negotiate to pay any outstanding debts. Please, we need your help. We don't understand who you are or why you're doing this, and again, but please, have mercy. I ignored them for weeks. Let them stew in their desperation, their fear, their growing realization that they were utterly powerless. Then I sent a single cryptic reply. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., the offices of Thorne and Associates. Thorne, a name I'd chosen with deliberate irony. Thorne and Associates was a shell company. It was a front that housed several of my holdings. The address I gave them belonged to a high-rise office building downtown. A sleek, modern tower of glass and steel. A symbol of power, of success, of everything they had lost. I knew they would come. They had no other choice. They were drowning, and I was the only one offering a lifeline. Or so they thought. I prepared the meeting room carefully, stark, minimalist, impersonal. A long, polished conference table. 2 chairs on one side, one on the other. I wanted them to feel small, insignificant, powerless. I watched them on the security cameras as they arrived, their faces etched with worry, their clothes rumpled, their demeanor defeated. Camille, her beauty faded, her eyes hollow. My mother, her usual composure shattered, her hands trembling. My father, his arrogance gone, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They looked broken. And it was my doing. They were ushered into the meeting room, their expressions a mixture of hope and apprehension. They sat down, their eyes darting around the room, searching for someone, anyone. I let them wait, let the silence amplify their anxiety, their fear, their desperation. Then I walked in. I entered the room, my steps silent, my expression unreadable. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, my hair styled, my demeanor confident, authoritative. I was a stranger to them, a powerful, successful stranger. They stared at me, their eyes widening in confusion, then disbelief, then horror. Elena, my mother whispered, her voice a choked gasp. Is that you? I didn't answer. I simply stood there, letting the realization sink in, letting them grapple with the impossible truth. But you're dead, Camille stammered, her face pale. You saw what I wanted you to see, I said, my voice cold, devoid of any emotion. I walked to the head of the table, taking my seat, my gaze sweeping over them, taking in their shock, their fear, their utter bewilderment. I'm not Elena Hartley, I said, my voice firm. She died a long time ago, thanks to you. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken accusations, with unexpressed emotions, with the crushing weight of their betrayal. Why? My father finally managed to croak out, his voice trembling. Why would you do this to us? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. Why? I repeated, my voice a low, venomous hiss. You left me to die. You stole my surgery money, my life, to fund Camille's vanity. My mother started to sob, her body shaking with uncontrollable grief. Camille stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and hatred. We were going to pay it back, my mother stammered. We needed time. Time, I scoffed. You had years, you had a lifetime to be my parents, to love me, to protect me. But you chose her. You chose her beauty, her ambition, her future over my life. I stood up, pacing slowly around the table, my voice gaining strength, my anger rising to the surface. I survived, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, hard triumph. Against all odds, I survived, and I came back. I came back to reclaim what was mine, and to make you pay for what you did. I explained it all to them, my meticulous planning, my subtle manipulations, my calculated destruction of their lives. I revealed every detail, every twist of the knife, every carefully orchestrated act of revenge. I destroyed Camille's career, I said, my gaze sweeping over my sister, who was now a shell of her former self. I ruined your business, I continued, turning to my parents and eyes. I took your home, your wealth, your reputation. I took everything. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of horror, disbelief, and a growing, sickening realization of the magnitude of their mistake. You were never my family, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. You were just obstacles. Obstacles I had to overcome. My mother reached out to me, her hand trembling. Elena, please, she begged. We're your parents. We love you. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the sterile room. Love? I repeated. You don't know the meaning of the word. I leaned in close, my face inches from my mother's, my eyes filled with a cold, unforgiving fury. You chose Camille over me. You valued her beauty, her potential, over my life. You left me to die alone and in pain, and for that, I will never forgive you. I turned and walked towards the door, my steps firm, my resolve unwavering. What? What happens now? My father asked, his voice a desperate whisper. I paused at the doorway, looking back at them, at the wreckage of my former family, at the broken, defeated figures huddled around the table. You live with it, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. You live with the consequences of your choices. You live with the knowledge that you destroyed your own daughter, and that she, in turn, destroyed you. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to their fate, to their despair, to their utterly and completely ruined lives. I never looked back. The aftermath was brutal. I'd unleashed a storm of calculated destruction, and the wreckage was scattered far and wide. My family, the people who had once been the center of my universe, were now broken, alone, and utterly adrift. Camille, stripped of her beauty, her career, her carefully constructed facade, was a shadow of her former self. The modeling agencies that had once clamored for her attention now wouldn't return her calls. The photographers who had once captured her image now avoided her. The social circles she'd so desperately craved now shunned her. She tried to rebuild, to reinvent herself, to find a new path. She took on menial jobs, waitressing, retail, anything to make ends meet. But the stigma followed her. The whispers, the rumors, the constant reminder of her past. Isn't that Camille Hartley, the one whose parents stole her sister's surgery money? I heard she's a total mess, lost everything, serves her right. She tried to reach out to old friends, to former colleagues, but they turned their backs on her. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything they despised. She was toxic. My parents, once so proud, so secure in their wealth and status, were now destitute, disgraced, and utterly alone. They'd lost their business, their home, their reputation. They were forced to move into a small, cramped apartment, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle they'd once enjoyed. They tried to understand what had happened, how their lives had unraveled so completely, so quickly. They replayed the events, searching for answers, for explanations, for someone to blame. How could she do this to us? My mother would wail, her voice filled with a mixture of grief and disbelief. She's our daughter. We raised her. We loved her. We made a mistake, my father would say, his voice heavy with regret. A terrible mistake. But we didn't deserve this. We didn't deserve to lose everything. They tried to reach out to me, of course. They sent letters, emails, desperate pleas for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for help. But their messages went unanswered. Their calls went straight to voicemail. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. I had erased them from my life, completely, utterly. They were ghosts, shadows of a past I had left behind. They would never understand. They would never accept responsibility for their actions. They would always see themselves as the victims, wronged by a cruel, ungrateful daughter. And perhaps in a way, they were right. I had been cruel. I had been ruthless. I had destroyed them. But I didn't regret it, not for a single second. They had betrayed me, abandoned me, left me to die. And I had survived. I had risen from the ashes, stronger, more powerful, more determined than ever. They had reaped what they had sown, and I had moved on. Or so I tried convincing myself. They could never fix it. They could never undo what happened. They were left with only the realization of their mistake and an eternity to think on it. Years passed. I built a new life for myself far away from the toxic environment of my past. I moved to a different city, a different country, a different world, and I thrived. My new identity, Victoria Thorne, became synonymous with success, with power, with innovation. I built a business empire, a financial fortress, a legacy that would endure. I was respected, admired, feared. I had everything I'd ever dreamed of: wealth, influence, independence. But I was also alone. The walls I'd built around my heart, the barriers of secrecy and control, they kept me safe, but they also kept me isolated. I had relationships, of course, casual encounters, fleeting connections, but nothing real. I couldn't trust anyone, not completely. My past, my secrets, my ability to see through lies made true intimacy impossible. I looked at my reflection in the mirrored walls of my penthouse apartment, overlooking the glittering cityscape below. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, strong, confident, successful, but also haunted. The scars of my past, both physical and emotional, were still there, hidden beneath the surface. The memories of my family's betrayal, of my near-death experience, of my calculated revenge, they would always be a part of me. I'd achieved my goals. I'd avenged my wrongs. I'd risen from the ashes of my former life and built something new, something powerful, something extraordinary. But at what cost? I'd become a master manipulator, a liar, a deceiver. I'd embraced the darkness, used it as a weapon, and in doing so, I'd lost a part of my humanity. Was it worth it? The question echoed in the silence of my opulent but empty apartment. I didn't have an answer. Perhaps there was no answer. Perhaps it was simply the price of survival, the cost of freedom. The ending was open, ambiguous. I had a future, a new life, a chance to build something different. But I also knew that I would never fully escape the shadows of my past. I would always be looking over my shoulder, always anticipating the next threat, always guarding my secrets. I was Elena Hartley, the girl who had been betrayed, abandoned, left to die. And I was Victoria Thorne, the woman who had risen from the ashes, the woman who had taken revenge, the woman who had become unstoppable. I was a survivor, a warrior, a ghost. And I was ready for anything. I would never be a victim again. I would never be powerless again. I would never let anyone hurt me again. I had learned a harsh lesson about family, about betrayal, about the enduring power of the human spirit. And I would carry that lesson with me, always. It had made me who I was, stronger, better, and I was finally free.